how was it with that experience of being half white and half Syrian,
Yeah.
and kind of the identity struggle that you had there, especially when you went to Syria and then had to choose, are you American or are you Syrian, or what's the scenario there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because, I think already we're having this conversation about the third culture kid, the kid who both his parents are immigrants and he lives here in the United States. And now he's in this third culture where he's not really from back home. He's not really from here. For me, I had this extra level of it. Because in a way, my mom being a convert, a revert, she's an immigrant. She was an immigrant into this new faith, and there were a lot of like uncertainties. How do you talk about, sex with your kids? How do you talk about all of these topics that they're learning about on American television in public school? So that was something that we had to navigate. And I'm not the only one who says this, and I feel like it's played out, but really, I'm a dwindler. The Arabs don't really accept you as a fully Arab person. The white people don't really accept you because, come on, bro, I ain't white. So you're responsible for finding and making meaning in the other things around you. So faith was really the huge marking point where I could find an identity within. But faith, couple that with like straight up, like I lived by the mountains. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. And if anyone has been to Denver, they know what the word giant means. We've got some places have big trees, some places have big lakes, but Denver had huge mountains. So part of my identity really ended up being one that was tied to the mountains heavily, and I thought framing myself around that sort of geographical identity, it really helped to feel at least belonging to something, um, but my parents, they had their problems. My mom was too soft. My dad was, of course, the conservative Arab. I always use this example to put things into perspective, but my dad, he was, I think, 22 when he came to the US. And back in Syria, man, like straight up, this is just the fact of the matter. The only people who dressed the way American women dressed were the Russian prostitutes. That was his only exposure to like the way women dressed here in America. So he's just like, oh my God, my kids are gonna become prostitutes if they're in this country. So there was like this like crazy fear. And so he was always, he's changed over the years, but I think like that Arab side, it was always so much more fearful. It was always focused on like things like how we dressed and stuff, because they thought that that was the most important difference between being in the Middle East and being in the United States. So that was tough. I don't know if it's the same for other young people like me, but we kind of had to like figure out what our religion was to begin with for ourselves, because what our parents were teaching us, it wasn't, you can only shove modesty down your kids' throats so much until it's not relevant anymore. We weren't thinking about modesty. We were thinking about whether God even existed.
Yeah, I know 100% what you're talking about, because I grew up fully. Both of my parents are Egyptian and Arabs, and so I had two sides very afraid, two sides with different fears. So, mother comes with her own fears than the father does, but both nonetheless were afraid of me becoming this Western child who didn't believe in Islam anymore, and you know be all the things that they stereotypically. I know that we a lot of the time say that the West has stereotypes against Muslims and Arabs, which they do, but we also, especially fresh off the boat, Arabs and Muslims have a lot of stereotypes about the West, which is, for example, like sexually deviant, drug taking, alcohol drinking human beings. And so it was very difficult growing up, always having like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And it's like, well, I wasn't planning on doing it, but now that you've mentioned it, now it's kind of crossed my mind. Like, why exactly? So it was that element was definitely there. And I struggled with that. I still, even till recently, I have struggled with my identity quite a bit growing up in the United States. Uh, but I would have to ask you then, because in Maryland, I didn't have any mountains in Maryland. I don't really have much. Have you ever been to Maryland?
I have. I think I've actually performed at your university
Really?
a few years ago.
Oh, I wish I would have came. But if you saw Maryland, there's not that much geographical beauty around.
It's
So
green.
it's green. That's true. That is true. But so that made it more difficult. And I think like you, I found my identity in my religion, and that was the end all be all. I didn't really find myself loyal to Egypt, and I will say I am more loyal to America. That if anything, if I had to choose, it really would be America since I'm born and raised here. But for Muslims like me who grew up, without something beautiful like the mountains in Denver, Colorado to look at, what do you say to them?
Hmm. Gosh, I mean, it's hard because when we don't have something tangible to connect to, um, you're almost open to anything that comes your way, right? And to those who don't necessarily have the mountains to connect to, I'm a poet. I never really planned to be a poet, but probably when I was like 12 or 13, whatever I was writing, just that's what it happened to be. I thought I was writing speeches. But if I had found some of these Muslim writers when I was younger, if I had found some of these people who were going through what I was going through, people who looked like me and people who ate like me, I think that there would have been a lot more guidance. I think the worst thing is not having any connection at all. And when our parents have no idea what we're dealing with here in the United States, I mean, how can you interpret your religion when religion comes directly from your parents, from the home? And I want to make a distinction, um, because I said my religion, but I believe faith and religion are two completely different things. Obviously, they overlap. It's like the soul and the body, right? They overlap, they belong to each other. But I honestly believe that I stepped into my religion only after my heart found God. And that was a tough experience, man. That wasn't like some sweet, I was sitting at the halaqas with all the aunties at the mosque. And straight up, like, I'm gonna be real, I was having what I called the meltdown. It was right before I graduated university. I was straight A student. I was studying for the LSAT to go to law school. I was on the board of an organization. I had just done my TED Talk. I had done all of these things. And like, I had no purpose. I had no sense of purpose. On a resume, people would be like, damn, this girl's got it all together. She knows what she's doing. She knows where. Nah, man. I was like 16 when I was like in the game. I had no mentorship. I had no adults guiding me whatsoever. So it was tough because I made a lot of mistakes. And when I say mistakes, like I fell flat on my faces in a lot of these situations, embarrassed myself in front of huge audiences. And you have to like really know, you have to come back to yourself. And there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of trauma that I had to process when I was 20. And so a couple weeks before finals, because what better time to have a midlife crisis and move forward to finals. I dipped out to the mountains. It was by myself. And like, it was kind of one of those moments where, you look up at the sky and you're like, come on, God, like, what is this? It was one of those moments where it's like, why God? And I found out in the year of the meltdown that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, man, he had a whole year of sadness. It's called the year of sorrow in the chapter books, in the story of his life. And he had that moment where he went up on top of a mountain, looked up at the sky, and he's like, why? Like, what do you want with me? And that was, he lost his wife, he lost his uncle, his people were ostracizing him. I mean, they were like throwing feces on his back, and it was just, and he wasn't getting an answer from God, and so he put his hands up and asked why and what. And I don't know why they didn't teach us that in Islamic school, but they definitely should have. But that was my moment where I just trying to make understanding of everything that we've been through. Why are we so lonely? Why is this so hard? And there's I think there's a verse in the Quran, and it says, if you go walking to God, God will come running to you. And I swear to you, Mahmoud, I'm not kidding. I was on this mountain, and I feel like for like 7-8 months, I hadn't even like thought of my religion. I hadn't even thought of Islam. My scarf was the only thing that made me a Muslim. I swear to you, when I asked, like, why God, like, what, I felt something around me. I know the moment it happened. I know exactly where on Lookout Mountain in Colorado it happened. But you just felt this, I just felt this presence, and some people probably say, nah, it's placebo, you're tripping. But I swear it was like the first time I actually like talked to God in months, and I felt overcome by it. And I think the time I became like a Muslim, I almost feel like I took my shahada at that point, that I like converted to my religion. It's so weird to say because I was born and raised a Muslim, but when I had that moment, that's when I started writing, like really seriously writing, and just getting to know like who I was and what we went through and where our parents went wrong, even though they had good intentions. Our parents never did anything to hurt us intentionally, but some of the stuff they taught us, it didn't prepare us for the real world, you know? So
At least it didn't prepare us for the world that we, and also it's because they didn't know the world that was coming at us. This is new for everyone, definitely.
yeah.
But I that really trips me out a little bit because it's like you had college and you had high school and you were a hijabi beforehand. So how did this moment happen post college? Because this moment happens a lot of the time for people during college or during high school where they're questioning their faith, and they're not really sure of what it is and they have to make a decision and they have an enlightening moment. So what was happening to you in high school and college, and what was it like really? I want to go back to Syria with you real quick. What was your experience like in Syria before the war?
Man, I hate to admit it, but we were little American kids who wanted ranch dressing and Toys R Us. We wanted our American luxuries. It was a huge adjustment. My dad was actually staying in the United States to work and run the business so he could support us, while me, my mom, and my four siblings, we had to basically survive in Syria. And I never quite learned the whole language because I spoke in English with my mom at home. But Syria, there were so many experiences that are irreplaceable. But I wish I could like go back to like my childhood self and just shake her and be like, yo, like embrace this, take it all in, remember every detail, because we haven't been back since. We can't go back as long as the situation is what it is. We're not allowed back there.
Right. And so
Yeah.
what happened, and how long did you stay in Syria for?
3 years, from 7 to 10 years old. Pretty
Okay.
developed.
So you went to high school in America and college in America. And at that point, I'm pretty sure that at least the most recent, the latest, or the last time I saw it, it was like 16 years old when you were giving poetry and about Syria at Washington D.C. and stuff. So what was going on there? What was your faith like in high school and college when you were performing these beautiful poems?
Yeah, I think it's worth starting with when I chose to start wearing the scarf. And I was young. I was 11 years old, and it was different for the generation above me. I think a lot of those girls, our older sisters, they were forced into it because they were that first generation, that sort of gerbils that they were experimenting on. But no one made me do it. No one even talked to me about it. The reason why I wore it was I went so I was in a private Islamic school, like I mentioned, and it was Friday. So, we wore our scarves on Friday to pray. And I went into an airport to drop my brother off. And I remember going into this airport and feeling so cool, so powerful. This like little, like 11-year-old girl who all these like, big, big people are just staring at. And I was like, they're staring at me just because I have a scarf on. And I was like blown away by how much power and identity has. So the identity of Islam was what really, really kind of anchored me in the religion. Now, at this point, my faith wasn't really prominent. I had my religion down, I had the practices down, the disciplines down. And like being a Muslim for me was always like it's you fundamentally are challenging the system when you walk around covered in a hypersexualized society. This is very rebellious. You inherently, Islam is, I don't want to say it's anti-capitalist, but it doesn't succumb to the hedonist like consumer culture that we have here. So I knew this as a young kid. I was writing poems about like, man, like consumerism. I was all about that. I was reading Noam Chomsky at 12 years old, getting some wild ideas. Immortal Technique was like the first poet I was really exposed to. So again, what anchored me was the identity component in my religion. So where I was with my religion was very secure. And that never at any point did I ever think like, I don't know if I want to be a Muslim anymore. The questioning specifically came was, I don't even know who God is anymore. That's really where like that fork in the road came for me. But throughout, Islam is a very social justice oriented faith when you go to the root of it, not when you go to the cultural aspects of it. So I always knew this. I always knew there's so many like quotes by the prophet. There's so much in the Quran that talks about, what justice is. One of God's name is the Avenger. This is a powerful name, especially for people who have been so deeply oppressed. And what I think? I think that faith, the secular form of faith, is humanity. If you want to take God out of the picture, what you have left is humanity if you're going to practice the same way that a religious person practices, right? In the sense that you are connected to something far bigger than you. Hope is secular faith. Humanity is like secular religion almost. And I really, really found myself like easily not confused about what oppression is and what justice looks like. And I didn't care whether the victims were Muslim or not. That didn't matter. But I knew that, honestly, like before that moment that I had in the mountains, I relied on the fact that God will give justice to people. I always relied on that because I've lost 49 members of my family in Syria, man. That's not a light burden. And I know, so a question I would get at almost all my shows, I kid you not, was how do you still have hope when you guys have lost so much? And it's hope in this like judgment day that the oppressor will pay for what they did. Not like the little boy who kissed the girl that when they're 11 in first grade. They're not going to go to hell. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk judgment day. Those things are different. We're talking about ultimate justice because when I see the world, I don't just see myself. I see masses of people. I see nations. I see refugee camps, So